The room smelled of whiskey and desperation when Mara realized her father was about to lose her. Not money, not land. Her. She'd heard the laugh before, the one that came when a man had already decided he'd won. Grant Dunn leaned back in his chair, cards loose in one hand, cigar smoke curling around his grin. "One more hand, old man," he said. "Let's make it worth something." Her father's fingers shook as he drew the cards. He'd promised this would be the last game. He'd promised for years. But promises don't hold long in Dry Hollow. Not when the whiskey's cheap and regrets free. Mara stood by the doorway, coat too thin for the cold, heart thudding like a trapped bird. She'd come to drag him home again, same as every week. But this time something in his eyes was already gone. A hollow that no daughter could fill. When he spoke, the words barely made it across the table. "I'll stake my daughter." The sound of chairs scraping, cards pausing mid-air. It was like time itself flinched. She froze. He couldn't have said that, not him. Not after all the times she'd carried him home, patched his hands, begged him to quit. "Come again?" Dunn asked, mock sweet. "You heard me." Her father's voice cracked, but the words stood. "She's worth more than what I got left." Laughter erupted. Men turned to see the thin woman in the doorway. Mud-stained hem, tired eyes, a face that had seen too many winters before 30. Something inside her broke then, not from shame, but from the dull knowing that this was where every road with him had always led. She didn't cry. Not yet. Just whispered, "Pa, don't." But he was already lost to the cards. Dunn's grin widened. "Deal it." And that's when the stranger spoke, a voice low enough to still the room. "I'll take that bet." Every head turned. The man at the end of the bar. Coat dusted from the trail, hat shadowing eyes that didn't look for approval. He walked forward slow, the way men do when they've already decided what line they'll die on. Dunn's smirk didn't fade. "You got something worth trading, friend?" The stranger, Cale Ryder, though no one dared use his name just yet, set his revolver on the table. Then a single silver coin beside it. "Her debt's mine now." The silence that followed was so thick it hummed. Her father slumped back, whiskey spilling across the cards. Dunn stared at Cale, then at her. "You got yourself a problem, Outlaw." "She's a debt no man collects easy." Cale didn't blink. "Didn't say I meant to collect." Mara's breath caught. She didn't understand him, or maybe she did, and that was worse. Because his eyes weren't hungry like the others. They were tired, like someone who'd lost too many bets of his own. Outside, thunder rolled over the mesa. When her father's heart finally gave out, no one called for help. They just stepped back, letting the old man fold like a shadow over the floorboards. Cale didn't look at the body. He just said, "Come on, you don't belong here no more." She followed because there was nothing else left. They rode out of Dry Hollow under a sky split with lightning, her thin hands gripping the saddle horn, his silence cutting through the storm. Every hoofbeat felt like an unanswered question. Who was this man? Why would he risk his life for someone like her? When dawn came, he stopped near a broken fence and finally spoke. "You can rest here. Ain't much, but it's dry." Mara slid off the horse, legs shaking. "Why did you do that?" she asked. He hesitated. "Maybe I owed someone." "Who?" He looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing a ghost he'd been running from. "You'll know when I figure it out." And just like that, he walked into the fog, leaving her with her father's ghost and a debt no longer hers, yet somehow heavier than ever. The storm had passed, but the air still smelled of wet dust and horse sweat. Mara hadn't spoken since they left Dry Hollow. She rode behind Cale, her hands gripping the back of the saddle, her thoughts tangled between shame and disbelief. She kept hearing her father's voice. That cracked whisper, "She's worth more than what I got left." It clung to her like the smell of smoke after a fire. When Cale finally stopped, dawn was crawling across the desert. The land looked empty, like even God had given up on it. A half-fallen fence, a cabin with one shutter hanging loose, a rusted lantern on the porch. That was the shelter he'd brought her to. He dismounted slow, every move careful, like a man trying not to startle a ghost. "You can rest here," he said. Mara climbed down, her legs numb. "Is it yours?" He hesitated before answering. "Was, long time ago. There was a story in that pause." She didn't ask for it. Not yet. He lit the lantern, its light spilling across dust and silence. "Water's in the barrel." Coffee too, if you don't mind it bitter. His voice carried no kindness, but no cruelty either. Just a quiet practicality that somehow felt safer than sympathy. Inside, the air was cold. She ran her fingers across the rough table, the cracked tin plate, the chair missing a leg. Nothing about this place felt alive, except him. He moved like someone who had forgotten what rest meant. Mara sat near the fire he built, hands close to the heat. "You shouldn't have done it," she said softly. He didn't look up. "Done what?" "Risk your life for someone you don't know." He poked at the embers. Maybe I knew enough. She wanted to ask what he meant, but the exhaustion in his shoulders warned her not to. Instead, she wrapped herself in a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. Outside, the wind rattled the loose shutter. Inside, only the crackle of wood answered. When he finally spoke again, his tone changed. Not sharp, just weary. "You got anywhere else to go?" She shook her head. "Not anymore." He nodded once. "Then you can stay. For a while." That for a while hung between them, heavy as a promise neither wanted. He turned toward the door. "I'll sleep in the barn. You'll be safe here." She stared at his back, unsure what to make of a man who offered safety without strings. "Why?" she whispered. He stopped but didn't turn. "Because somebody should have done it for me once." Then he left. Mara sat by the fire long after, listening to the quiet creak of the barn door, the soft murmur of his horse shifting in straw. She didn't know what kind of man he was, outlaw, savior, or just another kind of broken. But she knew he meant it when he said she'd be safe. When she finally slept, it was the first time in years her dreams weren't of running. Morning came with a pale light slipping through the cracks. She found a tin cup of coffee on the table, still warm. Outside, Cale was mending the fence, his coat thrown over a post, his shirt sleeves rolled, his breath fogging in the chill. For a long moment, she just watched him. The way he worked. Quiet, steady, like he was trying to rebuild something that had nothing to do with wood or wire. And for the first time since her father's death, Mara wondered, not if she'd survive, but if she could ever trust peace again. Mornings at the cabin came quiet, just the sound of the wind brushing through the dry grass, the creak of the fence, and the scrape of Cale's boots on the porch. Mara had started waking before him, though she pretended she didn't. She liked the silence before his shadow filled the doorway, before his voice broke through the soft rhythm of her thoughts. Each day followed a pattern neither of them had planned. She'd bake what she could from the little flour he brought back, patch his shirts, or tend to the herbs growing wild near the well. He'd mend the roof, fix the trough, or ride out for supplies without saying much. They spoke, but mostly through gestures, passing a cup, moving tools, a quiet nod when something got done right. It was a kind of peace that didn't need words, but silence has a way of showing what words try to hide. Mara noticed the scars on his wrists when he washed by the trough, thin, old, and deliberate. He noticed the way she flinched every time thunder rolled, like the memory of being traded still echoed in her bones. Neither asked. Both understood. One evening, while the sun spilled through the cracks in the wall, Cale found her kneeling by the stove, stitching the torn hem of her skirt. "You so neat," he said quietly. She smiled faintly without looking up. "Mama taught me. Said if a thing's torn, you fix it before it frays too far." He leaned against the doorframe, watching her fingers move. Guess she was right. Something softened between them after that. The kind of soft that sneaks up on you, like the first warmth after a long storm. That night, as the wind howled outside, Mara couldn't sleep. She watched the fire burn low and thought of her father. Thought of the way shame had carved him hollow. Thought of how this man, this outlaw, had carried her out of that room without asking for anything. Maybe it wasn't pity that drove him. Maybe it was something harder to name. By morning she found him outside, working the fence again. His hands were steady, his eyes distant. "You ever think about going back?" she asked suddenly. He didn't stop hammering. "Ain't much left to go back to." She stepped closer. "And before all this? Who were you?" He was quiet a long time. Then, a man who rode with the wrong kind. Thought money could bury what conscience wouldn't. Mara studied him. "You rode with Dunn," he nodded once. "Long before he owned that saloon. Long before I learned what it costs to sell your soul cheap." Her heart twisted. So he was part of the same world that ruined hers. And yet, He was also the only one who had done a single decent thing. That contradiction made her dizzy. He looked up then, meeting her eyes. "You think less of me now?" She hesitated. "I think—" "Maybe you're just trying to pay back a debt that don't belong to you anymore." His jaw tensed, but there was something like relief in his gaze. Maybe. They didn't speak after that. The air between them carried more truth than talk ever could. That evening, she brought him bread still warm from the fire. He took it without a word, but his hand brushed hers just enough to say what neither dared. Later, as night fell, she lit the lantern. Its light flickered across the cabin walls, touching the worn lines on his face, the faint curve of her smile. Two people, once broken by the same world, now sat across from each other, quietly learning that maybe peace doesn't arrive with forgiveness all at once. Sometimes it starts with a shared silence and a lantern burning low. It began with hoofbeats. Slow at first, distant echoes rolling off the dry hills, then louder, angrier, like the past itself was coming for them. Cale knew before he even looked up. He'd felt it in the stillness that morning, the way the wind held its breath. Trouble always finds a man who once rode with it. Mara was hanging laundry behind the cabin, humming under her breath, when the sound reached her. She froze. "Riders," she whispered. Cale came out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag that wouldn't stop shaking. "Go inside," he said. "What's happening?" He didn't answer, just took his rifle from the porch and checked the chamber like a man reacquainting himself with an old sin. By the time the dust settled, 5 men had surrounded the cabin, 3 of Dunn's, and 2 wearing the deputy's star. The tallest called out, "Cale Ryder! You're wanted in Dry Hollow, dead or alive." Mara stepped forward before she could think. "What for?" The man sneered. "Murder, theft, harboring stolen property." His gaze flicked to her. "That'd be you, ma'am." Cale's jaw clenched. He could have run, maybe even won, but the law has a longer memory than mercy. He dropped the rifle to the dirt. "I'll go." Mara grabbed his arm. "You can't. They'll kill you before sunrise." He looked at her, steady, calm, already half gone. Wouldn't be the first time someone tried. They bound his wrists and threw him into the wagon. Mara's voice broke through the dust as they rode off. "He saved me. He paid what my father owed." But the men didn't listen. Justice in Dry Hollow was never about truth. It was about who had the loudest claim. The town square hadn't changed. Same warped sign above the saloon, same faces that once watched her father lose everything. But now it was her they were watching, her and the outlaw they called a murderer. Dunn stood on the porch, smug as ever, polishing a ring that didn't belong to him. "Welcome home, sweetheart," he said. "Guess debts always find their way back." Cale stood silent, blood on his lip, eyes fixed somewhere far past the crowd. Mara could see it, the way he refused to beg, the way guilt sat heavy but pride kept him upright. "You think you can just take what's mine?" Dunn taunted. "A gambler's daughter bought with a gun and a coin." "She's no one's," Cale said, his voice rough but clear. The crowd murmured. Dunn's grin faltered. "Then tell me," he hissed. "What is she to you?" Cale's answer came quiet. "A chance to be better than I was." Something in that broke Mara's composure. She stepped forward, shaking, tears cutting through the dust on her cheeks. "You want truth? He's the only man here who's ever done something good without taking something back." The deputy shifted uncomfortably. The crowd fell silent, but Dunn wasn't done. "That so?" he said, drawing his pistol. "Then maybe you'll watch him pay for that kindness." The shot came faster than thought. Mara screamed as Cale hit the dirt, the echo tearing through her like the wind through a canyon. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Dunn laughed, a sound colder than any bullet, and holstered his gun. "Guess debts are settled after all." Mara dropped beside Cale, pressing her hands against his chest. "Don't you dare leave me here," she whispered, the words trembling out like a prayer she didn't believe in. He opened his eyes once, just long enough to see her face. "You should go," he murmured. Then he went still. The crowd drifted away one by one, leaving only her, the dust, and the silence that comes after everything breaks. Somewhere in that silence, a storm gathered again, this time not in the sky, but in her heart. When the sun rose again, it found Dry Hollow washed clean. The night storm had carried away the blood, the dust, and maybe, just maybe, a piece of the hate that fed this place. Mara rode out before the town woke, her dress still torn, her face streaked with dirt. She didn't look back. Not at the saloon, not at Dunn's men, not at the past. Only forward, toward the canyon road where they'd taken him. Cale Ryder wasn't in the grave the deputy swore he'd dug. He'd crawled away from death the same way he'd crawled away from every sin that ever tried to keep him. She found him 3 days later, half conscious in an abandoned miner's shack, his arm bandaged with a piece of his own shirt, his breath shallow but steady. When he saw her step into the light, his lips twitched in disbelief. "You're a damn fool," he rasped. She smiled through tears. "Takes one to find one." For a long while neither spoke. She just sat beside him, holding his hand like it was the last coin in the world, and she wasn't ready to spend it. Days turned into weeks. She nursed him through fever and silence, mending wounds with the same quiet patience she'd once used to mend torn hems. When he was strong enough to stand, she told him what he'd missed. "Dunn's gone," she said. Town turned on him after what he did. Guess justice came late, but it came. Cale's eyes softened, the way a man's do when he realizes the world went on without him. "And you?" he asked. "I stayed," she said. "At the cabin. It's ours now." The word ours caught him off guard. He hadn't heard it in years, maybe ever. They rode back together slow, the canyon winds carrying bits of quiet laughter between them. When they reached the homestead, the fence stood mended, the garden green again. Mara had rebuilt what life had tried to bury. He stood by the porch, staring at the house as though it were something sacred. "Didn't think I'd see this place again," he said. "You didn't," she answered softly. "Not the way it was. But maybe we can make it what it should have been." That night, she lit the old lantern, the same one he'd once placed between them when trust was still a fragile thing. Its glow filled the room with warmth that had nothing to do with fire. Cale sat at the table, running a thumb along a scar on his wrist. "I spent half my life breaking things that couldn't be fixed," he murmured. "Didn't figure I'd ever be part of something that could grow again." Mara looked at him, really looked, past the roughness, the lines, the guilt that still clung to him like shadow. "You didn't save me back there," she said gently. "You just gave me a chance to save myself." He met her eyes, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Guess that makes us even." She laughed, low and warm, the sound rolling through the quiet house like a promise. When dawn came, he was already outside, carving something out of a piece of oak. She stepped onto the porch and watched him for a while before asking, "What are you making?" He held up a small carving, a heart joined with a spade, rough but honest. "A marker," he said, "for debts that don't need keepin' no more." She took it from him and nailed it above the door. "Then let it stay right there," she said, "so we don't forget where we began." As the morning light spread across the valley, 2 figures stood by the fence they'd mended together, no longer outlaw in debt, but man and woman bound not by what was owed, but by what was chosen. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of new rain and wild sage. For the first time, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was home.